Hi, Ross. Welcome to a discussion we're going to have today about the National Cannabis Master Plan. So, this was something that happened earlier today on the 30th of March, and it was hosted by DTIC and the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. And it was quite interesting. Firstly, it was a 4.5 plus type of hour session where we got an unpacking of the National Cannabis Master Plan. And Ross, can you give me maybe some of your thoughts on how it went today? What did you think?
Yeah, look, it was great to see the turnout. I mean, I haven't seen a webinar series sort of like that where 300 people are jumping on to hear government's input, especially from the Department of Agriculture. So, yeah, in terms of that, it was great. In terms of the way that they want to move forward with the cannabis industry, I think it's fantastic having the different value chains. So your recreational market, your medicinal market, which obviously we know is already taking off. Um, and then obviously your hemp for industrial purposes. So yeah, in terms of the value chain, I think they're taking a great approach in terms of what they want to do and where they want to be. I think personally, along with the timelines, I mean the timelines or the framework that they've given us is up to 3 years. I think it's pushing it a bit. I think they need to bring that down and get things happening a lot faster.
Yeah.
That way, obviously, South Africa can start thriving within an economy, especially with COVID-19. So in terms of medicinal value as well, that can assist. In terms of poverty, hemp can assist. So there's a lot of different benefits that can come from it. So I think if they speed up those timelines, we'll have a much better economy in South Africa and a lot better cannabis profile globally.
Yeah, perfect. I agree with that completely. I mean, the biggest concern has been the timelines. Increasingly, it's good. The amount of engagement that was in present. It was over 300 participants, as you said. I think the moderators did really well, and the presenters. I mean, Tabo and Francina from Agriculture did really well. The gentleman from DTIC, gave us a short introduction on their scoping within the space, and I think Dr. Julian Jafta did really well as a moderator. I think he controlled what could have been a very precarious and difficult environment. You can imagine 300 stakeholders or more in the industry where everyone has got an opinion. Some are focused on deregulation, others on regulation, others are focused on testing and safety, and others are, it's my personal rights. There were lawyers involved, biochemists, chemists, manufacturing guys, international players as well in the space. So I will say well done to the team for managing to keep it in a very controlled format. Some of the questions and statements were a bit on the longer side, as anyone who watched would know. It would have been nice to maybe pre-submit some of those questions and kind of have a review session on it. But it was a good job on the whole part. But today we're not going to spend 4.5 hours discussing it. I think we want to try to achieve an overview in a very succinct kind of directed manner. So I'm going to jump straight into it. I mean, DTIC had obviously there was quite a bit there. Well, they didn't have much to say, but other than the fact that they really had to kind of put up their visioning or reimagining of the industrial strategy. And I think this is where they've engaged with industry elsewhere around, these cannabis master plans from their perspective and how to facilitate it. But I think you agree with me that the big thing they're all waiting on is, modifications and improvements when it comes to the Drug Trafficking Act, as well as the Medicines and Related Substances Act. Do you see it the same way, that DTIC can't
Yeah,
move until that's done?
yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, they obviously DTIC needs to understand that the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act will automatically affect the Medicines and Related Substances Act. So those together need to be amended. Maybe the schedules need to be re-looked at, and that will obviously allow trade to move forward. Maybe with the scheduling changes, we can obviously start doing a medicine rollout in South Africa in terms of supplying a dossier, allow the pharmacies to dispense, or even opening up a dispensary model for the cannabis cultivators.
Yeah. Okay. 100%. I mean, look, I was concerned about the timelines they still had for these amendments. I think these are overdue. They're ones that should have been done or about to have been done. So hopefully that will be progressive. I mean, they gave us some background. I think they've done some good scoping on some international markets in the space. Basically, their objective was around the industrialization and commercialization. And we're going to get into the three different models, like you mentioned, recreational, medical, and then hemp. I see hemp being split as well between industrial and CBD wellness, but we'll talk about that. They did talk about some numbers like a 28 billion type of projection and 25,000 jobs. That's pretty lucrative if you're generating 25 or 28 billion from 25,000 jobs. I think the job number will be higher, but it all depends on the type of model that gets opened up. You know, if it's very much a medical model, that's not that that's the focus, it will expand beyond that. But that tends to be very high precision work. And then from there, industrial and recreational should be big numbers for jobs. But again, timelines, big one. So, you know, when will they achieve that? By when? In terms of their challenges facing the sector, I mean, nothing too surprising there. You know, barriers to entry, how to involve co-ops and integrate, you know, the guy on the street into the type of a regulated market. Any kind of unforeseen challenges you saw there, or any comments?
Yeah, look, I mean, legislative restrictions, compliance restrictions. I mean, that's more or less what it boils down to. I think they were touching a lot on the seed issues. So no formal seed supply, like they show they were challenging facing the cannabis industry. I think they pretty much nailed the hammer on their head there in terms of no formal seed supply systems. So that's obviously something that needs to get sorted out. Yeah, as of the other stuff, I mean, it's normal in the medicinal market that we still seeing some of this. So yeah, market challenges. Yeah, it's pretty much the same. I mean,
Yeah,
nothing really further to discuss here. I
yeah,
think
no,
that job value chain needs to go up. I mean, hempcrete alone will create 10,000 jobs. So yeah, I think that's a little bit of a safe number. I think if all three of those value chains open up, I think those jobs numbers can increase dramatically.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, agriculture's role is really in the, I would anticipate, the hemp space. So let's talk about the National Cannabis Master Plan, essentially consisting of 9 pillars, the so-called house that holds up the master plan. You know, aimed ultimately at commercializing around those 3 different sectors. Um, I think we're going to probably dig quickly into the different aspects. I mean, the big one is, you know, regulatory systems upfront, sustainable seed supply, research and development, sustainable producer support, more around the farmers and cultivation, market development, supplier development and engagement, good manufacturing or just manufacturing processes, how that's going to be reviewed from an agro processing standpoint, as well as any kind of extraction and tertiary processing. And then, you know, the education and training ultimately underpinning all of that, as well as communication and awareness. And I think today's session was very good from a perspective of communication and awareness, because we did have, like you said, it's rare that you see up to and over 300 people in a room, and that it was actually managed in quite a controlled manner, despite what I thought would be quite difficult to manage, a room of that size and opinions that diverse. So again, a big up to the moderator there, Julian, for controlling it. I would say, you know, the one thing that everyone is interested in is, we know that medicinal cannabis has come quite a bit of way along the route of SAPRA. I think stakeholders in the industry today, it felt to me that, you know, if we went back a year, 2 years, there was a very strong radicalization between access to the plant, and, you know, this aversion to medical. And I think medical is starting to be seen a little more in terms of it's just one aspect that is very specific in terms of the type of products it produces, the type of market it caters for. There is a strong need for that to be domestic and not just export facing. But I think the real interest today was in the discussion when are we seeing hemp, and then when are we seeing recreational models come out? Because I think if there's a strong understanding or plan for recreational products, I think it takes a lot of the pressure off what we'd call a medical product for THC. And I think that's maybe where the direction is shifting, is how do we constructively start talking about a recreational model in the next year, 2 years, possibly a third year? You know, how's that going to be workable within the space? And if that happens and that framework solidifies, I think it takes a lot of pressure off individuals like, or organizations like SAPRA, because it's, I mean, at the end of the day, they're regulating the end use of the product. And I think this came out today in today's discussion. We should really be focused on the regulation of end purposes and use. And I think that pulled through. So I think a lot of individuals drove that message home. I mean, we had quite a nice diverse set of views that came through, from medicinal cannabis cultivators and facilities to CDCSA, to guys that have been in the space for a long time, on the recreational space, the club models. I think a lot pulled through. Anything that really, yeah, what stood out for you in terms of the opinions and the suggestions?
Look, and there's obviously a lot of different perceptions, or different opinions. There were so many people on there. I mean, it was hard to keep track of where everyone was. I mean, by the time you read one comment, it was already past. I mean, the amount of people that were on there. But look, I mean, in terms of the professionals that are involved in the cannabis space, I think they must be excited with the way this is going to move forward. Like I said in the beginning, I think it's just a timeline issue. In terms of the recreational market, look, recreationals, it's like a rock and a hard place. My understanding of going recreational would be trying to do a dispensary model. But that way you're allowing the South African Pharmacy Council to get involved. So then it becomes the 10 pillars of cannabis. So there's a lot that this can move forward. There's a lot of different avenues this can move forward. So yeah, look, if those guys can give input that were all on that chat today, I think if 300 people can come forward and give ideas, I think all of us can also get a great idea of what's going to happen and how we can all move forward together with this industry.
I agree. I mean, look, I mean, if I talk about dispensing models for recreational, it's very separate and very different from what we call traditionally a clicks, dischem, a type of OTC over-the-counter, or even a scheduled dispensary model. It would be very much like what you see in some of the states in the US. You know, that's a very I don't know how to put it, but you know, there's a need for standards. I mean that seriously. Like, there needs to be consumer standards. It needs to be fast-moving consumer goods aligned. I think one thing that came through strongly today was the essence and the need for testing across the sector. I think that was a big message. I mean, yes, you've got the right for own cultivation at home, and you know what you're putting on your plants, and you know, if you trust your friends, there's a model around how to share. But when you're dealing with the sale and the scaling of any product, there has to be quality considerations and testing considerations. And I think increasingly, I think we all agree that safety, not that the plant's unsafe, but things like pesticides, heavy metals, all of those can have a long-term negative effect if it's not properly considered for commercial product. And I think that's where the job creation and the lack of liability will come from. Is we'd love to see a dispensing model that is a little more in alignment with some of the states in the US, provided that the infrastructure is right in place there. So I'm not going to dwell too much on that because it's still a bit of a distance off, I feel. I think today's conversation was maybe more geared towards hemp. And hemp is obviously got the entire value chain that they listed here in terms of beverages, textiles, plastics, paper, industrial products. And then obviously the cosmetic, the food additives, novel foods, cosmetics, and nutraceuticals and beverages tend to fall a little closer into that kind of area where SAPRA would be involved, because we're dealing about a consumable product that's being consumed, whereas the industrial products tend to be, it's not for human consumption. So the regulations would definitely need to be more relaxed there. I think let's jump into the pillars. Regulatory systems. Big one there is supported by justice and correctional services. Where are we seeing that go in terms of the immediate future?
Look, I mean, the Department of Justice has to get involved at some point, especially correctional services as well. There has to be a legal framework around this. At the end of the day, even though hemp has a high consideration for CBD, it also has trace amounts of THC. So in order for you to get to a certain parameter, you need to come under the 0.2% mark in terms of THC. So with that, there needs to be a lot of framework involved. There needs to be a lot of testing. Testing is massive. It's a massive factor. Whether you're doing hemp or whether you're doing cannabis in terms of CBD and THC, testing is always going to come into factor. And it's actually a good thing. We should test products. We should make sure that it's safe. Whether it be for industrial, for drinks, for cosmetic lines, at the end of the day, if we do push out a clean, safe product globally, I mean, it takes a different turn completely.
Yeah.
We'll be known as the guys that actually take this industry seriously, and we actually want to move it forward and progress. We don't want to regress. Everything must be progression. So let's move forward.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because, you got to try to find a way to incorporate all models. And if the plan is to incorporate a model for hemp, medical, and for recreational, it's always going to be challenging. And it should be the first pillar because it's such a... this is why it's probably not progressed so quickly, so effectively, is that we're sitting with a situation that you're trying to incorporate different models. I think the segregation of models in terms of, this is what we've done for medical, this is what we want to do for hemp, and this is what we want to do for rec. The more we talk about those separate conversations, the easier it becomes, instead of just speaking about it as one discussion, because there's so many different value chains that come out of the plant. And I mean, the personal rights aspect as well is, that's a completely different value chain as well, because it's your own personal right with the plant. So, it gets complicated from that perspective. So, I think it's a challenge, and good luck, with anyone involved in this process, because it does require a lot of considerations. In terms of sustainable seed supply, I mean, there was a few points that came up around, how do we incorporate local genetics, land races, how do we also work with the phytosanitation certificates and bringing in specifically known genotypes for the plants. What do you see as a challenge here around sustainable seed supply?
Look, obviously the product needs to pass from license holder to license holder globally, not just in South Africa. So, look, the way it needs to work is, obviously, if there's a guy in Europe, I mean, these guys have been doing genetics for years. I mean, guys in America, they've been doing genetics for years. So the only way we would be able to progress from that would be using land races, like you say. But then we would have to start doing our own sustainability in terms of testing. So testing still comes down to it. Doing our own phytosanitaries, ensuring that the seeds are safe. Do we have feminized seeds? Do we have auto seeds? That also comes into effect. And then not just that, tissue culture. So I think in terms of a seed supply, I think in general, a starting material supply is where we're finding a challenge. So yeah, right now you're allowed to import seeds or tissue culture, depending on what you want to do. It all boils down to the regulators on where they want to do this, and this is Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development's job. This is where they fall under, and this is something that they need to tie in and get closer to their chest.
Yeah, I mean, look, as well, when we talk about how do we incorporate co-ops and guys who've been working with the plant for generations, there has to be an involvement here, I suppose, from the ARC. I know CSR, ARC, and everyone has done research going back a couple of years, up to 20 years now on hemp. Tony Budden was active in that space as well, and is still. So it's one where, there is actually quite a bit, I think, out there on, how certain seeds and varietals have performed. And I think it's an important aspect that we are talking about domestic seed banking and seed generation and registration. Because if we're talking about registering local strains, local seeds, local clones or tissue culture even, that's a positive move. I think that's important. I think it should be, as a second pillar, important to get that right, because if you've got a sustainable seed supply system, it becomes easy now to fulfill the requirements around a medical, a hemp, and a potential recreational product. So I think that helps. It's a challenge, but let's jump onto the next pillar so we can kind of keep it concise. Research and terms of technology and development. I mean, this is where universities are active. I know that there are a few universities that are quite active in this space. So it's great to see that. For me, the need for more clinical trials when we talk about a medical product and its claims is critical. I would say I've always been a big fan of the concept of something like a regulatory sandbox, where you might have an area where kind of you can experiment and play in that space and do R&D in a non-regulated environment that falls within, let's say, a kind of like a special zone that has some exceptions to the current laws within the country. That would be great for R&D purposes, a kind of a tech incubator that has a bit of leeway in terms of the scoping. I think it's just difficult. When we talk about research and development, we bring testing into it. And right now, the process of, getting the testing lab set up and getting the, even your reference standards for testing into the country requires permitting, requires, sourcing that, then you've got to validate methods. Absolutely, there should be a lot more proficiency testing in the space. Testing came through a lot today, and I think it's good to see that testing had a bigger discussion and role in discussions today than it had in previous like stakeholder engagements, because I think people are starting to realize, as an industry formalizes, there needs to be a push towards a stronger sense of what's in the product. So, I mean, for me, and I mean, this is an area we're going to touch on in production. What did you see from the producer support systems? What was your view in terms of how agriculture supports small businesses? How do they play a role there?
Look, so the way I got this was that they want to allow the legal guys to obviously come into the market. So instead of making them the black sheep, rather allow them to join the sheep and move forward. So allowing them to work under a formal system and a legal system for that matter. I mean, I'm sure these guys are probably tired of getting arrested and their doors kicked down. So I think it would be a good strategy to get these guys in terms of a development or be supported by agriculture to develop them in coming up in the space, whether it be recreational or even a medicinal enterprise. Obviously, they'll have some other guys they need to compete with, but yeah, I mean, if they can do this right and they get the right members behind them, I'm sure they can enter this market and we can move forward. It helps progression.
Yeah, I mean, they focus on technical support, financial support, and zoning. I mean, zoning's a bit complicated because you've already you've given out medical cultivation permits and licenses, more specifically. So, that's distributed pretty broadly across the country. So, we've seen things with Humboldt and zoning and, areas where you cannot necessarily grow hemp. It's a challenge. Zoning is always going to require more time, more considerations. It's something to be addressed and looked at, but it's going to be a difficult challenge if you're talking about zoning. But it's going to be an important aspect because we know about the issues around, cross-pollination between hemp and cannabis. But we can have that as a discussion on a separate webinar. That's quite easy to go through. Market developments. I mean, how to facilitate the domestic market? I mean, the biggest thing here for me is we really need, if we're going to be serious about exporting medical products or medical grade products, we need to have someone do a marketing authorization locally so that we can have doctors prescribe a medical product and not go through a arduous Section 21 application to get a medical product into the hands of a user. And that obviously will be offset by guys that grow at home for their own personal use and medical purposes, which is where a lot of the traditional healers and Rastafarians and everyone kind of already uses cannabis, and they should be no longer arrested for that. I think it's one where we also know that there needs to be what is called a formal medical market so that someone who's particularly risk adverse as a patient has access, and we're ultimately enabling access of the plant. It is somewhat a bit ludicrous to have a medical structure that's only export facing. We need to facilitate domestic markets for medical. And also now we talk the rest of the value chain, hemp products. I mean, this came up. I asked the question, and again, thank you for agriculture for answering it, but I was looking for a definitive answer on when hemp or commercial permits for hemp and licensing will be available. Because, I mean, we said of a lot of people who had a hemp research license or permit, and they kind of stuck. Because where's hemp going and by when? And will it include processing of CBD? It does seem like there's maybe a structure around that. It's just who's going to give oversight on that? Will it be that it sits with agriculture as an agro-processing standard, maybe for a dietary supplement type of product? And how much will SAPRA be involved in that processing facility and the testing aspects? So in terms of market development, I mean, there's I think there's more questions than there are answers, but I think they're slowly unpacking and addressing all the different value chains, and they engage in all the different stakeholders to understand the value chains a little more thoroughly. What's your view?
Yeah, look, you've hit the nail on the head there. There's not much I can really add to this. Yeah, you've pretty much nailed it.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm sure there's different opinions, but we're just trying to do our job to kind of reiterate what we saw today and just share that to a broader audience. So whoever wants to see it, if that recording is not available, at least our synopsis and our interpretation is available for individuals to look at later. Supply development. This is a big one. I mean, incubation of new suppliers. It talks about facilitating and supporting the signing of offtake agreements. Again, that worries me a little to some extent if they're referring to offtakes being exclusively international. I think we need to facilitate offtake agreements for a formal economy locally. So, if we're talking about an offtake agreement between a farmer, a processor, and a pharmaceutical manufacturer locally for product locally, fine. If we talk about that, not just for pharmaceutical, but a CBD wellness, nutraceutical, botanically derived product, I'm fine with that as well. If we're talking about that same offtake for the BMW dashboards, going into plastics, going to textiles, I'm completely fine with that. Same with a recreational model. If we're talking about facilitating a dispensary model, where that product is being sourced, how it's being sourced, and how it's being supplied, and where those seeds are coming from, and the land races, I'm fine with that as well. But if offtake is meant to just be focused on international, then I have my reservations. So, I think that kind of was my take on it. Did you see it differently in terms of, supporting emerging suppliers?
Yeah, look, I mean, even the co-op model would work here. So like you mentioned, you have your agriculture side and then you have your processing side. I think it's a good model to work with. I think that would be a great value chain. I think keeping the product locally would also increase the economy. There's no point of doing an export model if you can allow your product to be moved within your borders.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that would be the way to move forward with this.
All right, 100%. So as we said, 9 pillars, we are number 7. Manufacturing and product development. Now, this is an area I'm extremely passionate about. I've had some conversations with the guys in the hemp industry. This is a 4-hour conversation by itself. All the products in the hemp space. I'm quite passionate about the medical and the wellness space as well, in terms of CBD, minor cannabinoids, terpenes, even THC in this space. I mean, all of this is really contingent on regulation, which was the first pillar. So, as excited as I want to get, as much as I want to talk about manufacturing and tertiary products, and, there's so many people that have done such a good job that are in, let's call it a bit of a gray area in the market, that, I'd love to see those type of businesses flourish under a manufacturing and tertiary product development cycle. But again, to get too excited here is, again, subject to regulations, subject to good seed intake, land race genetics being captured, profiled, documented, registered. All of that's kind of important as a prerequisite. So I don't want to drag onto this too much, but the potential's massive. I mean, I'm glad if DTIC, the Department of Trade and Industry, everyone is seeing the potential here, not just locally, but we could be strong commercially in an export environment as well. Because, at some point the US will federally go legal on cannabis for adult use, I'm sure, and not just medicinal. And then they're going to look for novel markets, African markets, where they can source an African-derived and based product. And I think that's going to be a great space. And I mean, this also builds into what I see the revolution or the stimulus of botanicals coming back into the space. Because, for generations, thousands of years, we've evolved with plants as a species. So, we've moved to the single molecule kind of Western medicine model, which doesn't always work. It's great for clinical trials because it's very controlled. But I think the botanical future is coming back. I think people want to work with plants. They want to derive energy from plants, medicinal properties from plants. I mean, I see psychedelics being a massive aspect of treatment for trauma. When we talk about the evolving psilocybin industry, there's going to be a lot that happens in the next 20 years in this space. And it's exciting to see that botanicals will really come back into a more general medical kind of framework. So, that's going to be a great thing to see evolve. But let's jump ahead. Education and training. It's kind of where it should have started. It is something that underlines all of the pillars. It's something we're passionate about as well. I know you're almost training clients daily in terms of, more on the medical side of things, the facilities. I see Department of Higher Education. How do we get the Department of Labor and Education more involved? I suppose resources like this is where we go.
Yeah, look, even this should actually be the first pillar, because in essence, everyone needs training to start moving forward and formalizing markets. So education's a massive thing, especially in the cannabis industry. If you're not educating yourself and not developing yourself, you're just going to be on the back end while everyone else is cruising forward. So, yeah, I think in terms of educating, it's a massive thing, especially with the cannabis industry. And training. Training in the medicinal market is a massive thing. Quality management systems, how standard operating procedures work. validation. I mean, we've touched on this before, so yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about it. They can obviously go check out the other videos if they do want to get more in depth about validation and that type of thing in training.
Yeah, 100%. So just in full context, I mean, we're definitely more on the medical framework side. I hope, and when we say that, we're not talking big pharma. At the end of the day, we're talking about how do we facilitate quality products in a controlled manner. And that needs to go, I think if you understand medical, it's really easy to start understanding the other product quality considerations that need to go down the value chain, from CBD wellness to recreational products. So at the end of the day, if we address the most complex elephant in the room, we start to make it a lot easier to unpack and ensure quality throughout the value chain. So that's really where we come from. We're not coming from it's pharma all the way. It's definitely, that's our background. That's where we come from in terms of the space. But we definitely see the inclusivity that's possible within the plant. And we expect that to be on the horizon for the different departments within government. Communication and awareness. I mean, we're kind of doing it as well. I mean, the big thing here is communication. It was great to see that agriculture came out with the request for input from stakeholders on the Cannabis Master Plan. It was great to see how they turned out in mass to attend. And it was also great to see how well the moderator did, Julian, in controlling the channeling of the questions. And they also were quite adamant about the inclusion of people sending them emails. So what I'll do is in the video, I'll include Francina's email as well, because they were quite open with people sending suggestions by the 6th of April to agriculture. I was at the 6th of April, 11 for 6th of April. So if you've seen the video too late, don't worry, still send them communication because it's an ongoing process. But they were quite open to suggestions from industry, provided it had a structure to it. What is a structured approach to do this? Not just, the discussions on justice is a completely separate discussion. We're not going to focus on that. We're talking about how to commercialize the different value chains. And for us, that was kind of, if all of this pulls together, especially pillar 1 and 2 being the most important, then I think we can see an effective commercialization strategy for the different value chains. What do you think, Ross?
Yeah, look, it all boils down to 1 and 2, and then the rest will follow suit. I'm thinking education and training should probably be in the top 3 there. But yeah, in terms of where we need to move forward, effective regulatory systems and sustainable seed supplies will enable the entire industry to progress. And that's what we need.
Yeah, like I kind of also see it when I look at an image like this. I look at the bottom-up approach, and communication awareness and training is kind of 1 and 2 right there. And then we have all the different, the 7 main pillars that hold up the rest of the house. So I think that's also how I kind of see it, even though it's listed as 8 and 9. I agree with you on, communication, awareness, education. That's where we start. That's what we're trying to achieve. And I hope the spirit in which we're trying to do that is accepted and, taken with the right spirit in mind. And ultimately, this should lead to a system where we can unlock value. Value for medicinal, value for hemp, value for recreational. I'm not going to deviate too much here in terms of, I think those are 3 good models. If we can kind of tackle each of these with good progress, we get to a point where, medicinal can be a little contentious because we're not, how do we incorporate indigenous knowledge systems, IKS, and traditional healers? I think that is a discussion on its own, and it's one where it can get a little convoluted around clinical trial data versus what we know to be allegorically or just generally true about the benefits of the plant. How do we get clinical evidence to support what traditional healers have known for a long time, but in a way that's where you can make a medical claim based on substantiated evidence, because at the end of the day, that's ultimately going to be a requirement when we talk about a medicinal product. So, I'm excited about seeing what happens in the space. I'm excited to see, the progress. In terms of closing comments, I mean, the big one is I wish we could have had these discussions more readily and more openly for the last year, 2 years. And I hope, like you said as well from the onset, that the timelines can be shortened. I think rapid iteration, regular conversation, regular discussions and reviews in the space is going to facilitate faster timelines and hopefully a willingness. And I think everyone is starting to become more willing from government to engage in this and see how do we map it out. It's going to happen. how do we map it out effectively so we can facilitate that everyone benefits, not just a few select individuals, which is ultimately what we're all pushing for. I mean, at the end of the day, people like to talk about big pharma, but there was someone who came on with a medical cultivation license, Brylan, from a facility, and she also mentioned her struggles as an African-based female driving the cannabis industry. One of the first with a cannabis cultivation license, and I mean the learning she went through, the struggles she went through, are all very real and all very much. It's easily brushed under the hood of big pharma, but I think. Those days are slowly starting to dawn on individuals is how do we commercialize the other value chains and make it as inclusive as possible, because at the end of the day, inclusivity is the key to making everyone buy in to the different models, and how to do that is a tough one. Ross, what were your big takeaways and what are you looking forward to in the future?
Look, timelines for me was a big one with this. I mean, I've mentioned it a few times in this video. So yeah, timelines. When can we start seeing things progressing? I mean, 3 years is long. It's a long time. I mean, there's guys that have invested money. Obviously, they want to see this go in different directions. I want to see this go out in different directions. I think a hemp market could be an extremely beneficial thing to South Africa. And not just that, even your recreational model. Look, I don't think the country's ready for a recreational model just yet. I think there needs to be a lot of things tied up with Department of Justice and obviously the law systems in general before they move that route. But definitely, I think if hemp can move forward very quickly and medicinal can keep cruising the way it's going, I think South Africa would be a powerhouse globally, and I think that's where we want to be. We've got the best environment and climate in the world, so why shouldn't we be the leaders? And that was mentioned quite a bit in that webinar series today as well. So yeah, I think also another thing is allow the experts to get involved. I mean, like today was a perfect example. Get all the people that are involved in the industry, get their input, let them get forward comments and see what they can assist you with. There might be a different approach that they use that you haven't thought of, and it helps. I mean, at the end of the day, we all have a goal, and let's achieve that goal together.
Yeah, no, fully agreed. I mean, and on the recreational front, I mean, in a sense, from the Concord ruling of 2018, I mean, everyone has the right to grow the plant. So, it's something that has to be actually worked on aggressively in concert with medical and hemp, because, if you're allowed to grow a plant and you're allowed to give that to a friend in the private space, you're basically in a position where there has to be a framework in place for potentially trading in that space. And we'll hopefully see good progression there. I know the private clubs have been active there. Hopefully there'll be more voice given to that. It kind of is one where, hopefully all of this pulls together. And I can just hope that maybe in a year, 2 years, we're looking back at it and we can say, look, it was a success story. Everything pulled together. It took a bit of time. It had a lot of headaches, a lot of frustration. I don't think there's anyone who gets into this. I mean, we're doing this in the evenings after doing our usual stuff in the day because we're passionate about communicating in the space, about sharing ideas. I often look at this and I say, why do you push so hard? Why do you try so hard? Because, this will happen and it's going to require effort to drive it. And I think increasingly communication as that ninthful first pillar in my mind is vital to just kind of disagree with people. That's fine. But you know what? Let's all just talk about it, because there's no point in not talking about it, not engaging in the topic, and just leaving it so that it can eventually be dealt with. I think the plant has too much value to add for it to just be ignored. I think it needs to be discussed. I think the different models need to be discussed. And it's great to see agriculture come out and actually engage industry constructively. I would love these type of sessions as well. If, sometimes with SAPRA, they have engaged in certain conferences I've been involved in. But, I would have struggled to see SAPRA do something like this where they engage with 300 stakeholders and have been able to control the conversation as effectively as what I saw agriculture and the stakeholders do today. So again, a big up to their ability to keep it controlled. And again, I'll say Dr. Julian Jafta did a really good job of keeping everyone in line in terms of coordinating the questions. and allowing individuals to be prioritized according to their hands going up and facilitating the questions, and also their willingness to go over time. Like we've unfortunately done this. We're on 40 minutes, but I wish it wasn't the case. I wish we could have done it in 20 minutes, but we wanted to do it justice and at least get our views on how today went out to the public at whole, and that they have something to refer back to, so that they can also just kind of see, what were the different opinions, what were the different views. At the end of the day, they've communicated openly around the plan, and I look forward to it. Ross, thank you once again, and looking forward to more discussions and more engagements in the space. And we'll be back talking about what we're passionate about.
Exactly. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate your time.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks so much, Ross.